I think it's important that we acknowledge the fear that less savvy customers do face. They don't feel like they can trust anything, and that fear is quite paralyzing. Should banks and telcos bear the cost of scams instead of consumers? Hi, I'm Yuan, and I cover telcos, infrastructure, and tech at BT. This is my colleague, Ben Paul. Ben wrote 2 opinion pieces in 2022 arguing that banks should bear all phishing scam losses. But many online clearly do not feel the same way. Before we dive into the comments, let's take a closer look at Jamus's proposal.
Fraud is almost always perpetrated on the weaker link in the chain. In this case, the vulnerable consumer. And this is why the government needs to step in to empower depositors with a more robust set of laws that offer financial protection to consumers. Furthermore, just as we have co-payments in most insurance plans, so long as savers are required to absorb at least some reasonable amount of loss, say an upper limit of $100 or $500, then it's hard to claim that the consumer incentives aren't well aligned with combating fraud.
I mean, if I disagree with Jamus Lim about anything, it's perhaps his reference to insurance. By making the banks internalize this cost, by making them ultimately responsible for the losses from phishing scams, they would have a very strong incentive to fix the problem.
You may agree with Jamus, but some Redditors do not. Let's take a look at some of the comments that they left.
Okay, so first question, or rather first comment, and I guess this one sort of sums up the sentiment out there. This meets the effing populist benchmark, and it will just simply embolden scammers of the world to target Singaporeans even more. So a very strong opinion there, not terribly helpful probably.
I think it's a bit of an oversimplification of the points brought up, considering the context.
Yeah, I mean it is a complicated matter, and I think it's important to drill down into the facts.
One of the other comments that we saw was this one. So it says, have any of you read MAS's loss sharing framework? Jamus's proposal of a $100 to $500 loss cap is far too low, but the framework will achieve very little in reducing phishing scams.
Yeah, so he's telling everyone, look, go read what MAS has actually proposed, which I guess is sensible.
Yeah, and I think in this case, looking at MAS's loss sharing framework, it actually requires banks to fulfill 4 narrowly defined duties, including providing outgoing notifications and a kill switch, which I think people agree that the government can do more in this area.
In my view, the problem is that the bank customers still face a lot of risk. I mean, one of the things I pointed out in the commentary last year was that under the shared responsibility framework, customers have to really watch out for notifications from their bank. It's just not always possible during a busy workday. On the other hand, the banks can easily protect themselves by ensuring that they fulfill those very clearly defined duties that you talked about. So it's a blueprint of sorts for the banks to avoid liability. I actually don't agree that $500 is too small a liability for consumers. As I said, the banks should be liable for all of the losses from phishing scams. In my view, nobody in their right mind would knowingly allow scammers access to their bank account. So even if their liability is ultimately zero, they're not likely to behave recklessly.
Another comment here, if users play an active role, even unwittingly, they should bear a fair share of the losses. If it is weak security on the part of the bank app or site, then the bank should bear the brunt of the losses. I think this comment was quite common as well. I think people generally feel like they don't want to be paying for another fool's losses. What do you have to say to that?
I had a lot of similar reactions to the commentary that I wrote back in 2022. Lots of people raised the issue of moral hazard, which is to say that people will become more reckless if they do not face any downside. I don't quite understand why people feel that way though. For instance, simply because I've insured my car against loss and damage doesn't mean that I'm going to deliberately park my car in a dodgy neighborhood. The way to think about it is that I need to insure my car because I live in a dodgy neighborhood where cars are routinely stolen or damaged. We live in a country that scammers are targeting from overseas. There's a crime wave going on. People are nervous, and if anything, they're being much more careful about how they behave online.
People seem very confident that they won't be scammed as well. I think this is a point that actually goes unsaid. I think the point here is about creating stronger incentives for banks to actually improve their processes. It's actually not new that such a reimbursement scheme is introduced. So in June of last year, UK regulators actually mandated that banks and payment firms have to reimburse customers in cases of online bank fraud. The sending and receiving firm actually pays the reimbursement 50-50. So the goal here actually is to see these financial institutions stop such scams from happening in the first place and better protect victims. Other payment networks like Visa, they actually have a zero liability policy as well, where if there are unauthorized charges to cards, or if a card is lost, stolen, or fraudulently used online or offline, they would actually cover everything. So this isn't a new idea.
Yeah, so because of their commitment to their customers, they are motivated and incentivized to work on the problem internally. Here's another interesting comment. Suddenly, to transfer more than 500 Singapore dollars, you need to go to the bank and sign with your blood.
We have another comment here that is a good to-do for how to scam the bank with this reimbursement model.
He's got it all worked out.
Yeah. So I think first of all, it's not so easy to open an account in another country, and you will need to have some collaborators with you. Also, you would have had to have $250,000 in a bank account, which good for you if you do have $250,000 in cash in an account somewhere.
Look, I mean, on the idea of trying to defraud the banks, I mean, all I can say is good luck to you. But just on the point about having to go to the bank to sign your name in blood, there is a general feeling that if you make banks liable for the losses, they're going to become more cautious about the services that they roll out, and that will lead to poorer service and thus convenience for bank customers. So, you know, the argument that people are making here seems to be, why should savvy bank customers have to protect less savvy bank customers? And I mean, you know, I suppose the answer here is that Singapore wants to have an inclusive and safe digital society. Banks have to calibrate their services for the benefit of all their customers while keeping all of their customers safe.
I think it's important that we acknowledge the fear that less savvy customers do face when they see the constant flood of news around scams. They don't feel like they can trust anything, and that fear is quite paralyzing. During the debate, many other MPs brought up stories of how their constituents were too scared to even engage with official government messages, which is very damaging. So creating some form of reimbursement scheme could be the first step to incentivizing greater investment by banks into tools such as artificial intelligence to better protect their customers.
So Julian, what does it feel like, you know, when you write a story and you get all these comments from people online?
You know, I thought the idea might be a bit more popular. That, you know, because the banks make such large profits, you know, people tend to want to see the big guy take the loss, right, on a lot of things. But you can see a lot of people also think about their own kind of interest in this case. Will this reimbursement model actually affect them and cause them to lose services or even incur higher costs in some way, lower interest rates maybe? So this is something that deserves a little more attention from the regulator perhaps.
I mean, but personally, I love reading these comments. I mean, it's, you know, this is the real Singapore, if you ask me. You know, it's what people really feel in their heart, not necessarily what they've actually thought about. You know, when you actually work through all the information, you might change your mind, but it gives you a good sense of how people feel.
What do you think of Jamus Lim's suggestions? Is the loss sharing framework currently sufficient to combat scams? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you for watching.